Hello and welcome to the Cca Summer Convention 2020, and I'm delighted to be hosting the Cca's first ever online digital conference. And before we start, I'd like to say a big thank you to our sponsors. We've got our gold sponsors, Oracle, Twilio and Vonage, and our silver sponsors, Poly. Without sponsors, we couldn't have made this event happen. Now, the summer convention was to be hosted at the Etihad Stadium in Manchester, as it was last year, but it will now run over the next 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, from 10 till 12 each day, from the glamorous surroundings of the CCA office in Glasgow and my front room. So welcome very much indeed. I'll dispense with the housekeeping because I suspect you all know where your loos are, and you are on mute anyway, so if your phone rings, we won't know about it. We have an eclectic mix of speakers lined up for you with different experiences, insights and ideas to share with you, as you would expect from a CCA conference. And we split the session into 2 parts, stopping for a very short comfort break at around about 10 to 11. So you can grab a coffee. As with all businesses today, I think it's safe to say that we've had to learn very quickly how to adapt to new circumstances brought on by the pandemic. But when I was thinking about this, I was thinking that this is something that at CCA we've been thinking about for a very, very long time: remote working, home working, the vulnerability of customers, but not just of customers, but of the employees dealing with those customers. We've been thinking about all of that for years. Things didn't happen quite as quickly, perhaps, as we might have predicted that they would when we were doing our thinking 10 years ago. But in the end, they happened at speed. And I think the response of CCA members to that need to adapt at speed has been very, very impressive. And we'll be hearing from a lot of people about how the pandemic has impacted them as we go through. Just a very quick run through of what we're planning this morning. A few words from our CCA Chief Executive, Anne-Marie Forsyth. Then we'll welcome Ben Page, the Chief Executive of Ipsos Mori. Then move on to Mark Gate, Director of Customer Service at O2, who will talk about the future of work, which of course we're all thinking a lot about at the moment. We then have our comfort break, followed by the first of 2 industry debates. Today's topic is digital transformation: reset, restart, reinvent. And I think some of those have got question marks after them too, and it would be great to hear your questions for that. We will hear then a conversation between Anne-Marie and newly accredited member Paul Lambert, who is Head of Customer Operations at Camelot, and round up today's session with a presentation from Shelley Kerr, who many will have heard at our December convention, who is manager of the Scotland's women's football team. Now, if you want to put questions as we go through, and there may, I hope, be a few opportunities, please will you use the chat button, because there are so many of you on this session that I won't be able to see you wave or raise your hand in the time-honoured fashion. So if you could use the chat box to put your questions in, Pauline and I will try very hard to keep track of questions that might come in and be suitable for the various speakers as we go through. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Anne-Marie, Chief Executive of CCA, to say a few words to open our Summer Convention 2020.
Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining today's session. Over the last few months, I've spoken to hundreds of business leaders who are responsible for customer service operations and experience that all of us receive from leading household brands across all sectors, including public sector, local and central government. As with any crisis, there are more questions than answers. Everyone agrees that the process of decision-making has changed radically. Things that used to take months and even years are now being decided and implemented within days and weeks. When you're thinking about future strategy, there are essentially 3 questions that we really need to give consideration to. What will be the impact on contact centre operations, given what we know about the economic outlook, specifically during the next 6 to 12 months? What have we learned from speedy digital applications? What works, what doesn't work? How will we know and how will we make permanent changes which actually last and benefit customers? What can we learn from change leadership styles and strategies throughout this pandemic? And how will we know what to continue with and what to discard? Will there be permanent changes to leadership styles? In terms of changing leadership roles, there are essentially three things which leaders have had to grapple with throughout this whole crisis. If the role has traditionally been about the effective working of an operation, the P&L, the balance sheet, the cost reduction, all that sort of stuff, then very quickly those leaders have had to take on board a much bigger interest in social well-being of the staff, whether they're home working or whether they're in an organisation which requires more safe distancing. This has been a real challenge, adding that to the day job, when perhaps it used to be something that was handled from an HR perspective, has now been handled by leaders across the whole organisation. And in addition to that, they've had to take on board a whole new operating model at the same time, with all the challenges that brings in quick time, as we've already discussed. So from a leader's perspective, there's far more to be challenged with, and there's the same amount of resource to do that with. And that's really called for a much more agile leadership function. Things that used to be targeted and measured are no longer targeted and measured. There's been a reduction of SLAs. Leaders are now requiring people to do what they can throughout this, rather than reverting to traditional SLAs. This has had a massive impact. And of course, that impact is being felt now as we return to normal, where customers are demanding just that little bit more of our operations. They were pleased in the early days to be receiving the service and grateful for it. They're now starting to demand business as usual. So the kind of conversations that leaders need to have with their teams, as well as being supporting, need to be challenging. That's a difficult transition to make, and we need to learn from each other about how to make some of these things happen. At the end of the day, there needs to be a balanced scorecard between performance, between social well-being, and between good operational excellence and management. And the role of a leader now, as ever, is being challenged just in a way that it hasn't been before. I also want to think specifically about first line management for operational teams, where their role before used to be a lot of scheduling, making things happen, making sure that the functions happened. That role now needs to be coach and mentor and support in a way that it hasn't been before. For some organisations, this isn't so much of a leap. For other organisations, it's a huge leap. And it's really challenging the role of these, who is supporting the first line manager, who themselves have got all the issues to deal with, whether it's home working, homeschooling, whatever it might be. In addition to that, taking on board all the challenges that their team may have. This is a big piece. And really what we need to be doing in any strategy moving forward over the next year is to build resilience, not only into our front lines, into our first line managers, but also to make sure that we look after those leaders who are responsible for the whole operation, because the challenges are simply much greater than they ever were at any time before. We've developed the Visionaries programme. We've adapted it to be particularly relevant to this time. It always was. The topics have not gone away. The topics about the future of customer service operations are still there. Those topics are still valid. What's changed is the speed of uptake. We no longer can ruminate about what things might happen in a year or 2 years' time. We need things to be happening quickly. And so we've upped the programme. We've got many more sessions built in. We've got loads of case studies, and we're finding a huge uptake. There's greater engagement than ever before. I think the positives that are coming out of this are a greater attention to the work that contact centre operations do, whether they're in offices, whether they're at home, hub and spoke, whether they're offshored or outsourced. That whole mixed model, there's a greater recognition to the challenges. Moving forward and building strategies which require investment need us to capture what's good and reflect that, talk about it positively. And that's what the Visionary programme's there to do. So we're happy to share with you many case studies, outputs, anything that you need from that. If you want to get involved, you can speak to a member of the CCA team about that as well.
Thank you very much indeed, Anne-Marie. And just reflecting on some of the things that Anne-Marie has said, more agile leadership function. Now customers are now starting to demand business as usual. They were, I think, prepared to wait for a little while things settle down again, but now they've got back to the point where their expectations are as high as ever. And we do need to be absolutely supportive of all our teams, but we've got to get that balance between performance and well-being. And this is something that we have been thinking about over the past few standards sessions over the past few months. So we will be sharing more of that thinking with you after this conference too. So now I'm delighted to welcome Ben Page, who is joining us, and it says on my notes he's joining us from London, but actually he's joining us from his living room like the rest of us. So Ben is a regular contributor at CCA conferences and events, and joining us today to take us on a whistle-stop tour of trends and predictions, including COVID-19. But Ben, I challenge you there because I say, I remember research from 10 years, 7 years, 5 years, 3 years ago, and we all focused on what the future was going to look like. Did we ever factor in a pandemic?
Well, actually, Bill Gates, of course, did. And there's a famous TED talk by Bill Gates where he talks about the forthcoming pandemic. And actually, when you look at the community of people who look at trends and futures, you will see that pandemics were generally there. So there's a question about whether governments should have been better prepared. And we'll come to that. I mean, these slides, by the way, are all available if anybody wants them as usual. So just email me or I'll send them to the CCA. So you don't need to write anything down, but I'm conscious of time. But the point I would make actually is this one. And this is the point, Liz, that most predictions are wrong. And I think when we're planning for the future, it's really important to remember that. So, for example, opinion polls can be really good. We were only 0.3% out on each party's share of the vote in December, but that was interviewing people on Tuesday about what was going to happen on Thursday. But if you're I think we previously talked at this conference about the work of Philip Tetlock, who has looked at predictions in business, science, sport, politics, thousands of predictions over the years in his various books, and then of course checked how many of these predictions came true. And he found out that experts sometimes I'm an expert, we're about 5% more accurate than random chance. Now, if you're a hedge fund, 5% is a really good arbitrage. You can do some really good things with 5% margin accuracy, but it's a real challenge. So this shows, for example, financial performance of 10-year treasury rates in the United States and what the experts, who are all paid a lot of money, predicted would happen. The blue line shows what actually happened. The colored lines between 1996 and 2015 show their predictions, and they're generally wrong. And you know, it's the same with humanity. Actually, we asked people last year what the biggest threat to their health was, and what was most likely to kill them next year. And they talked about something like cancer or obesity or diabetes or pollution, and only 4 people in 100 talked about influenza, malaria, SARS, or anything like COVID-19. So if we know that we're likely to be wrong, that's sort of helpful. And I think one thing to remember about the pandemic is we are 3 or 4 months into it, and the long-term consequences. I mean, we can talk about the death of the office and virtual offices and I'm running a virtual call center as we speak for our business, but we really are in many ways too close to the trees to see the wood. And I think that's something I want to reflect on. We wrote this report as we went into the pandemic. It was written in February, but we've been updating it with things that have been occurring during the pandemic. There's a little website, you can go there and download it all. But I think there are things we do know that will happen. So we know that even with or without COVID-19, there will be more Nigerians than Americans. You know, popular demography is destiny, so we can be sure about that. Britain will have an aging population, despite COVID-19 having killed 1 in 60 people over 90. 1 in 60 people over 90 being killed by COVID-19, but only 1 in 7 million people under 30. We have a world of growing inequality and opportunity, and it's been really interesting seeing the impact on business during lockdown of the Black Lives Matter protests, both in Britain and America. And if you have a diverse workforce, these issues and how we deal with issues of ethnicity at work, how we deal with mental health, how we deal with gender equality. These things aren't going away. I mean, I can predict it. Whatever happens with COVID-19, geopolitical tensions. Again, Trump may lose in December. He's currently 13 points behind Joe Biden, but don't write him off yet. But certainly we don't seem to be in a world of unilateral, with strong unilateral government by the United Nations and global institutions. We're in a world where it's Europe versus America, China versus Europe, Russia versus everybody. Data world, I don't need to talk about. Technology tipping points, I think, are huge. And I think it's really interesting to think about how those apply in different industries. But, Uber is a brilliant example of how you need the invention of rockets, you need the invention of satellites, you need the invention of global positioning satellites. Oh, it stopped. Lovely. You need the invention of smartphones, you need the internet, you need all those things together, and suddenly you get Uber because you get that confluence of technology. And then, of course, the planet we live on, climate change ultimately will probably kill more people if the scientists are right, and I have no reason not to believe them, than the pandemic. But the pandemic itself is, in a sense, a form of, is in part caused by the way human beings have overtaken the planet, creating, in a sense, a force that's now more powerful than, evolution itself. And of course, zoomorphic diseases, which come from animals like SARS, like AIDS, and like COVID-19, it wasn't really created in the laboratory, we think. It might have got out of the laboratory, but it wasn't created there. All of those things are more likely where human beings are rubbing up against animals because we're wiping out so many habitats. And it also, of course, is able to spread so quickly in a way that it couldn't when we were just living in caves, because we're able to spread it around the planet amazingly quickly as we travel and live in incredibly congested large cities. So those are the known knowns. Those are all going to go on happening. And the way we're looking at human society and the people that you and I have to deal with on a daily basis is that those are macro forces. They change society. And those changes in society we can see in terms of local expressions of change. So climate change drives concern about methane being produced by animal husbandry and raising animals. And you get a surge in interest in vegan food for all sorts of reasons. A signal is that you go to your local Greggs when it reopens and you notice that they're selling vegan sausage roll. That's a signal, but it's driven ultimately by climate change. So that's, COVID-19, of course, interrupts all of that. It's a massive disruptor. And it's a big shock, but we are very close to it. We can see loads of things already happening. People piling into computer games. 12 million people watch Travis Scott inside Fortnite. As soon as we went into lockdown in Europe, Xbox just crashed. We've got signs of a more caring society, all those WhatsApp groups that we belong to, shops trying to respond to the needs of older people, new ways of greeting people. We've got lots of bad science. There's a conspiracy that Bill Gates is behind this, together with 5G masks, to try and vaccinate everybody with a deadly vaccine. There are even people who are pointing out that Ipsos Mori being employed by the government is somehow trying to vaccinate you all. We are testing hundreds of thousands of people in Britain for the presence of COVID-19 to help with knowing where to ease the lockdown for the government, but I'm not trying to vaccinate anybody or take your DNA, which are some of the allegations. So there's a whole sort of conspiracy theory of stuff going on. And of course, confrontation, it comes from a laboratory. It's the Kung Fu virus, as President Trump likes to call it, or boomers like me. We cared about the virus, but we didn't care about the planet. It's all up. So we can see all of these sort of potential changes in society, the death of the office, but we don't know yet which will stick. What we do know is that people's underlying values, their beliefs in things like the death penalty, gay marriage, their values don't really change. And when we were looking at earlier this year at people's values, we came up with 12. You don't need to read them all now, but they're on the website. But key ones for brands, as always, authenticity is king. And particularly, I think, for people on this call, data dilemmas and the tech dimensions. Because one of the things we found over the last 2 years is that although people say they're worried about data privacy, in fact, they are actually becoming more data apathetic. And overall, and there's always tension in all of these things, which is why one of them is labeled climate antagonism, between those who are deniers of climate change and the majority think it's happening. But on technology, it's interesting that actually when we dug into it, we found concerns about privacy in Europe, where we could find the trend data, are identical as they were, the same as they were in 1992, before the internet was even really working for most people. So, we must be careful about spotting patterns that don't exist. And then, of course, we've got some of these other key challenges which were present before COVID-19, fear of the future, being worried about what's going to happen to your kids, the loss of the future in Britain, where 45% of people in Britain now said before the virus and before the recession we're now going into, they said that their children would be poorer than them. 17 years ago in 2003, that figure was only 12%. And that has triggered, as particularly with the shock of 2008, a huge wave of populism across our societies, that, the future is not what it was promised. And that, is a huge challenge. So looking at some of those trends, I think it's worth reminding ourselves that we shouldn't necessarily expect the whole world to be completely different. Eventually a vaccine will be found, and it takes time to really change our values, because opinions that we measure are really just very sort of shallow things. How do you feel about Boris Johnson having a baby or something like that? There are attitudes that we measure, perhaps how you feel about government generally. Those change more slowly, but our values are change much more slowly. And what I do, of course, is measure values, attitudes, and opinions, but it's important to distinguish them. I'm going to show you some data here, going back to 1999, where you can see that in 1999, internet penetration was 13%, and it's now, last year, about 93%. But on other issues, like feeling overwhelmed by technology or wanting to slow down your life, so before Spotify, before Facebook, before the internet was really going anywhere, we still had a pretty much identical proportion of people saying technology is too much, it's all this, it's too much, I want to slow down. Things just didn't change. Or indeed, getting on in life, the way to be happy in life is to be a CEO of a big company. Fulfillment in life is a prominent position in your chosen career. It hasn't changed at all. Now, some things have. Our attitudes to homosexuality, our attitudes to drugs have completely changed over the last 30 years. Although, interestingly, our attitudes to adultery haven't changed at all. Just as many people in 2020 think that adultery is wrong as thought it in 1989. So more relaxed about pornography, more relaxed about homosexuality, but not about adultery. So certain values just don't change. And we should bear that in mind when we're looking at the signals that we're seeing. We do think that, authenticity is king for brands. And I think the crisis makes that even more important. People want brands that they feel align with their values. They also want a good deal. They want great customer service. We know that CEOs keep telling us that they are delivering a brilliant service. But as we know, when we talk to consumers, and you know this as well as I do, only 30% of the customers of those organizations will actually agree. So there's still a big problem in terms of delivering. It's all one, it's great to spend a lot of money showing what, on marketing communications, showing what a great brand you are. But if you don't live up to it, when the rubber hits the road, you are just destroying value. We've got this endless, it seems, in every wave of this study that we've been doing now for over a decade, this sort of search for simplicity and meaning. And if you as an industry can give people simplicity and recognition, again, we are really sort of making progress. And that, Amazon is clearing up because it's just made everything so frictionless. At the same time, interestingly, although people want, simplicity and they want brand, they say that they want purpose, they want brands to speak up on issues like Black Lives Matter. At the same time, a lot of people are just saying, well, look, actually, life's so complicated and I feel so worried about the future. I'm just going to try and have a great time and forget the future, because actually I don't know when I'm ever going to be able to afford a house, and I've no idea what my pension is actually ever going to pay out. So I'll just have a great time. And there's some elements of that globally as well. But in terms of what comes next, we've seen during the crisis continuing rises in adoption of online technology, and it'll be really interesting to hear some of the other speakers about what's been going on. But certainly what we're picking up is more, massive demand for online shopping, massive demand for online banking, and if anything, more unmet demand than people like Ocado have been able to meet. It's very likely those habits will stick. Interestingly, when we look at privacy, and we've done that in particular in relation to the virus, this is a study with the Financial Times. You've got 49% of people saying they support the government finding out if you're following social distancing rules and fining people who don't follow them. And 49% favour the government being able to do that, compared to 29% opposed. Being able to track people. And so again, as I say, we know that people are concerned about privacy, but ultimately, if it's convenient or if it's for a serious cause like a life-threatening disease, they will go along with it. We know also, of course, that the public is currently scared of coming out of lockdown too quickly. 60% of us say we're worried about going to a pub or a restaurant now. Only 20% of us say we feel comfortable using public transport. And as you can see, most people have said that the UK government is relaxing measures too quickly. This doesn't mean to say that things won't go back to normal, because people, once they see other people doing things, we are social creatures. We will, when we see other people in restaurants, we'll feel reassured. But there is a real fear out there. And speaking of somebody who just lost one of his best friends from university, who only went into hospital on Thursday and died on Sunday, the disease is still there, and consumers know that. And even before we went into lockdown, one of the strongest values globally was this fear of the future value, this concern about, particularly in the West, much less so in Asia, that this sort of level of uncertainty. And of course, as the ONS figures have shown, in terms of well-being during lockdown, anxiety, mental health have all suffered. So we can see all of these current signals of change that may come in our society, the massive digital acceleration of the last few months. I fear that many of us will find ourselves spending more time at conferences like this in future than we would have done before COVID-19. We can see, a potential green reset. We'll see about that. Big brands are likely to benefit. We've seen people reverting to trusted brands from their childhood, people like General Mills who make Cheerios, pouring money into marketing. We've seen lots of examples of brilliant purpose, people repositioning themselves as, LVMH making hand sanitizer, this beer company making hand sanitizer. There are changes in consumer behavior around health and fitness. There are signs that as after 2008, a double whammy of a squeeze on incomes plus fear of a pandemic disease, an endemic disease, may mean that we retreat to our homes. So DIY, home cooking all start to become more important, and people keep some of those habits they learned in lockdown. And finally, big government is certainly here. Many Western governments will continue spending much more than their incomes for some time. How we pay it back is not clear. So those are all signals. We don't know yet entirely which will stick. But if you're interested in which ones would stick, I would say the ones that were present before. But, as always, the thing that is going to be a problem is not the disruption of COVID-19, I would say. It is ultimately just being average and mediocre. That's what mediocre, actually means, just being really, really average. And that is as before, is the challenge, particularly at a time when people are trying new choices. There are all sorts of new channels that consumers have discovered. We know that people want to be recognized. We know that people at a time like this in particular, where they're anxious, want to feel listened to. And, if we're able to use all of the technology that is at our disposal to really acknowledge people, and given the rise of data apathy, we need, there isn't a problem with that if you do it well. We know people want to feel listened to. And ultimately, the greatest human need is to be recognized and valued. And so if you're able to do that, that doesn't mean with money or prizes or rewards or points. It does mean in a human interaction where, you feel that there is some sort of emotional connection. The perennial challenge for my banking clients is not that they're incompetent, but it is that people suspect their motives and feel that they have no emotional connection with them. So those are the things that, particularly I think in a time of COVID-19, are at the top of people's minds, feeling recognized and actually using the data we have about people so that we can almost predict things, listening to them and valuing them. And there's a question, I think it's a good one once in a while to go and see how you stack up on that. We know that CX as a profession remains under pressure in terms of its relevance. We remain under pressure in terms of showing how we can monetize the investment that people make in CX in terms of getting money back into the business. And of course, action really, really matters, and feeding those. And where people have got those feedback loops working, you will all show each other brilliant ones during this conference. CX has no problems. So the future is, of course, becoming much more predictive using all of the data that we have, becoming more preemptive, but it's likely that you're going to need this. We know you buy this every year or you contact us every year, getting much, much better at that. And there's still so many businesses that fail time and time again to do that. Overall, just keep challenging, I think, keep innovating. If we can do that, we will get through the crisis. Finally, I'll just say, when you look at what's going to happen in the next period, and it isn't beautiful. It looks like a deep recession. If you look at 2008, it took several years to get turnover, GDP back just to where it was in 2008. It's not a V-shaped recovery by any stretch of the imagination. Some sectors will be pretty much permanently changed. If you were a heavily leveraged business, barely covering your loan costs before you went into this, you won't be in business for much longer after furlough ends. But it will be, as Darwin puts it, the most adaptable people and brands, not the biggest and not even the cleverest. And with that, I will love you and leave you. Thank you very much.
Ben, thank you very, very much indeed. And can I just offer commiserations on the death of your friend?
It's just a reminder, the virus is still there.
Absolutely, absolutely still there. And there may be lots of people on this conference session this morning who have lost loved ones. And I think we should commiserate with absolutely everyone in this situation. But Ben, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us. There are no questions posted, and actually we're out of time for this session anyway. But I think what I always pick up when you talk is that need to be recognized, rewarded, listened to, and valued. And it's still as important as it's ever been. So I think that segues nicely into our next guest, who is Mark Gate, Director of Customer Service at O2. And Mark, I think you're talking about the future of work. And we agreed this presentation before the pandemic. So I suspect that you've been trying to adapt it to fit what has happened since. Welcome. It's really great to have you with us, and over to you.
Hello everybody, my name is Mark Gate and I've got the privilege of leading the customer service teams here at O2. This session is going to be very much a conversation, and it's going to be a conversation about the future of work, and that's a big topic in itself. And if you think about the last 12 weeks or so, it's an even bigger topic than we would have ever imagined it to be. And I won't have all the answers, so I'm sorry if I'm going to be disappointing people right at the start of this session, but I think there are a number of questions that we're probably all grappling with at the moment, and we all probably need help to talk about and think about as leaders. And I guess as leaders, we've all probably felt quite out of control at certain points over the last few weeks or so. Sometimes you may have been severely impacted with channels, and you may have not had particular channels available at all, whether that was your web chat or whether that was a voice contact centre. So extraordinary times that we're now thinking about this question, but we would be amiss if we were thinking about the future of work without the new lens applied really through all of the COVID-19 actions that we've all had to take. So this session will just try and think about some of those things and some of the questions we should be asking within our businesses and of ourselves, I guess. Another one will be the geographies that we're in. Many people will have a blended or in-house and outsourced type of environment. You might have offshore still. And again, there is no wrong or right answer to those. There never has been. But equally, you've got to be thinking about, is the geographies you're in, does that give you a advantage, or is there further risk now that's attached to that? So again, another one that we should be thinking about when we're considering the future of work is also the geographies in that way. And I guess that, I guess everybody I have spoken to over the last few weeks or so in various things like this, I don't think there's one single person that hasn't been thinking about it's not going to be the same when things come back up. And also what might the learnings that we can take from this, and therefore, are there positives about this that we can think about in terms of the ways of working for our people? And I think there absolutely are. We will all be having a think around that. And I guess the other one is, of course, self-serve, and we'll come on more to that topic. But I think many of us would have been on that journey for some time, and we will have seen our customers needing to use self-serve applications as opposed to the traditional ways of coming into contact centres. And so how do we look at the things that customers can do for themselves, and might that be something that they continue to do in a post-COVID environment? So I think that's an important one, and again it changes to some extent the ways that customers are interacting with us into the future. And a little bit about O2 as well. So our vision for all of this from a service perspective is we've been on a really successful journey of I guess combining customer choice, so being able to contact us when they need us, but equally more and more capability in things like the apps that we provide customers. And so that's been a continued progress over many years, and our unassisted channels are our biggest ways of servicing customers now, and our assisted channels like the contact centre for voice or web chat, definitely the place for the more complex query. And I think the other thing that was and is part of the plan is the future of AI. So as we think about this being real and being sort of in the next 1 to 2 years, that is very much on the plan. So the plan is that we will have things like AI, which allows that interaction maybe to be a full digital interaction with customers from an AI perspective, or it might help us with things like identification of a customer, and it's in that short to medium complex world. So that feels really real. And prior to COVID, this was definitely on the roadmap. And actually, pre-COVID, taking a good look at these things and saying, are they right? So the things that you might have had in plan pre-COVID, are they still the right things to do now we're starting to come out of it in that way? And I think my headline would be, absolutely. The things that we thought were really important to progress customer service and to give our advisors the tools to do the job in the future, next best action, things like that, are all still really relevant. So I think my first headline would be, actually, that hasn't changed. So if we had a 3-year plan with all of those things still in it, if anything, I think those things have got even more important. If you think about things like business continuity as an example, then they become even more important than they ever have been. And that kind of seamless handover from an agent to from an AI perspective into a live environment. These things are all going to be things that we need to do, grappling with, and still need to execute really well into the future. I think, though, when we start to look at it as businesses, what in this, especially now in this post-COVID world, and where we've had to make a decision on what type of calls we might take and what type of calls we can't take, I think that really plays into the future of work post-COVID. So I think where a customer still has a need for an emotional connection with us, we have to still be available to talk to those customers. And where there is an absolute need on something that's really urgent for them to do, again, the same thing. Or whether it's something that we want to add value as an organisation, if it's another product, and we feel it's a relevant voice-assisted channel conversation, again, we should be making sure that we're still doing that. And I think those are the key things, is how are you in your business establishing what are those conversations? What data do you have available to you that allows you to think about it in that context? Is this an emotional connection with a customer, or is it not? And for those really transactional things that have remained in that kind of online environment, we really have to think about, when service comes back up, how do we make sure that maybe the learnings through this process means that those customers for the more transactional things stay using those great services and tools that we've provided, because there really is some benefits for the customer because of the ease of doing those things, and there are obviously efficiencies for any business that's really done that successfully as well. So I think definitely reviewing your plans, reviewing your 3-year plans, I think the things that you were thinking about that were going to make that easier for customer, maybe thinking about things that were in that camp of artificial intelligence, all of those things become ever more relevant in a world where you might need that business continuity in a different way. And I guess what we've also got to think about is, we've all gone to, I'm sure there's not anybody listening in that hasn't had just an amazingly different operating model in these past few weeks. So we, as an example, from a home working perspective, we're very much a small amount of social media people doing that, but not really en masse anywhere else from a live customer contact type of point of view. And we've gone into now having several thousand people working from home, brilliantly servicing our customers. And that is something that ordinarily we had that as part of a plan. And that was on the roadmap, that we would want an element of flexibility in the workforce and people having the ability to be transient in that way and work from maybe anywhere. But it was definitely, a couple of years down the line. And within a matter of weeks, we have now got thousands of people serving our customers in that way. And I'm sure many of you have done something similar. And why would we ever roll back on that? That is something that is going to remain as part of the operating model here at O2 now. It's really safe for our people right now, and customers are getting what they need. So it really becomes a question of to what percentage of the people will remain in that on a more permanent basis when we're perhaps through some of the next short to medium term period. But it's been fantastic to see how organisations can mobilise so quickly when there is a real desire and need to do one thing, and that was we want our people to be safe and we want to service our customers. But home working is definitely now part of the operating model and therefore hugely changes the future of work for many. What does that mean in terms of how you have to help those people from a team leader perspective? What's the role of a team leader? All of those things now look very different from maybe an element of our workforce. And so, those are things we're making sure we've got those support mechanisms in place for. So, home working has been a phenomenon for us all. So, some blinds just coming down in the background. We'll ignore those. The other thing I think is that customers, we may need to consider about the vulnerability of customers in the coming weeks as well and months, because we know that many customers will be going through difficult times and have done already. And I think that level of vulnerability is something that, again, we need to consider. So, how many of our teams in the future need to be equipped to make sure that they've got that additional support to deal with vulnerability out there. So that's, again, something that, we are certainly taking very seriously. But equally, I think we all have to think about vulnerability for the UK for not just months, but potentially years. And how does that change the type of conversations you need to have, and how you need to make sure that your people are as equipped as they need to be in that side of things. So I think when you look at the short to medium term in terms of the learnings and the future of work for people, yes, that you've got the home working element there, but also I think the jobs to be done, what is it now? If you've managed to deflect lots of call volumes into self-serve, and at the moment, even if you had plans that you were going to get better technology and things that allowed you to do that in a much more seamless way, that won't be immediate. So I think the real winners of this over the next 6 to 12 months are, what are the things you can do brilliantly now within self-serve? What are those things that you've already got the tools where a customer, through a customer journey and a map of that customer journey, can a customer do end to end? How many of those things have you already got understood? Because if you know those things and you've got data that tells you those are the types of calls that can be fully automated, then again, I think what we all need to do is look at that from a self-serve perspective and map it from a journey perspective. And that's how I think the organisations that do that brilliantly and really understand that customers can be educated to continue that and bring the service back into the assisted channels from where you perhaps are today, which is that suppression of some of those things. And that will be done on the emotional connection point I made previously, where if that's an emotional connection you need to have with that customer, then you absolutely need to make sure that through either your routing or your direction on the websites and things, that you're getting those calls answered again and making sure that those customers are getting the brilliant services across your industries that they need. So it really is, I think, an extraordinary time. Huge amount of learning. I think my message would be lots of questions that we've got to think about. I think that there are probably plans that you should review when you thought about your 3-year roadmap for your contact centres and your people that work within them. Are they still as relevant as they were pre-COVID? In the example that I've just talked about for O2, absolutely. The things that we want to do into the future are still really relevant, if not even more. But we've got to think about that from a people perspective. We've got to think about that now from a location. And as we've just talked about, home working is going to be huge and will remain part of that operating model. It's accelerated us to where we would like to have been in a year or two's time. That's fantastic. So we've got to make sure about how do we support our people in that environment. We've got to consider customer vulnerability. We know that there perhaps will be more customers that are vulnerable in the future. How does that shape and change the things that we need to equip our people with in that way? And we've got to think about the journeys that our customers are going on through self-serve. How many of them are brilliant enough to remain in a post-COVID world? How many of them would you keep in that automated place? And how many of those journeys would you really want to make sure that you're having that conversation for the emotional connection or the added value that you want to create as a result of that? So I think the organisations that do that well will still see themselves having brilliant customer experience, but they'll also gain the efficiencies of those things, and customers will be very much in that space of still being able to get that blend of choice, but know where to get the best out of that organisation, either through doing it themselves or still being available in our contact channels. And I think that's going to be the sweet spot for us all to grapple with. And I'd love to open up the conversation now with everybody just to say, right, okay, you've all probably got some similar stories. Like I said, I won't have all the answers, but I'm very happy to join the conversation around what you're all thinking about in terms of some of those topics, and maybe some that we haven't even touched on so far. So I'll hand back and we'll start that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Mark. That's absolutely terrific. It would be great to start the conversation, but unfortunately, Mark, I don't think you're with us online or able to be with us online at this point. So great. I have so many questions that I'd love to ask, but I do think the words that are going to stick with me from that are the thinking about emotional connections and when people really need to be talked to because there are those emotional connections. And I would just add on the vulnerability point, which I've been thinking about for several years now in various organizations. The vulnerability of our customers is one thing. The level of vulnerability means at this point in time, we're probably all much more vulnerable than we have been in the past and to certain degrees. But the teams not only need support to help those vulnerable customers, they themselves can be impacted by dealing with customers who are vulnerable. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area too. Now, quick comfort break, and we'd like to start again at 5:02 with the 20-minute industry debate. So grab a cup of coffee or do whatever you need to do in your 5 minutes, and we'll see you back here very shortly. Thank you. accelerating decision-making at pace and forcing organisations to reassess their customer service and CX offerings from the inside out. Where decisions previously took months or even years, mobilising change in our current time is happening overnight. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that. We are delighted that you're joining this discussion panel for an insightful and highly valuable discussion. Along with our fellow panelists and summer convention attendees, we will look at shifting priorities as we explore a reset, restarted and reinvented digital transformation program. We've got George Roby, who is Business Solutions Lead at Oracle CX, David Cousins, EMEA Sales Lead at Twilio, and John Ainsworth, COO at Atos. And I would like to ask our panelists if they'd like to just give us a 30-second introduction. George, would you like to kick off?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Liz. My name is George Roby. I've been in this business about 20 years, and from a software vendor's point of view, the frustration has always been seeing projects stall and sort of not move very quickly. This pandemic has turned that on its head. Things have moved so quickly. I've been working in CX and CRM for 20 years, as I said, in public sector. Even public sector organizations, bless them, are moving fast. And this is a very exciting time. You know, not to change the fact that it's also a very frightening time for people, but this has been such a catalyst to make things happen and to accelerate the process of change. Exciting times.
Absolutely. And David, would you agree? Exciting times?
I think exciting's maybe we need to just define exciting. I think certainly the past 3 months have been very full on, lots of fear, change, technology gaps that need to be filled within, well, most requests come through as we need it yesterday. I think there's just been a real evolution in terms of rethinking the way that we interact with people. And again, to sort of echo the points from the sessions with O2, how we self-serve at a time where we've got no real knowledge in terms of what that new home working solution or what that new home working environment might look like, but we've clearly got customers on the end of the phone or other channels that need something. So
Thank you, David.
Exciting.
Thank you. Thank you. John Ainsworth, what's your take?
Hi, good morning, everybody. I think exciting. I agree. It's been absolutely full on. I think that it's been about juggling a number of priorities in terms of being able to still be able to serve customers and give customers access to service, whilst also being able to care for employees. And I think it's been a really important time in terms of communication to colleagues, being able to support colleagues through various different circumstances, while still being able to offer essential services to the British public.
Thank you all very much. Now, this is a very short session, and I would really like to get in some of your questions. So if you can just find that chat button at the bottom of your screen, type me in a little message saying who you are and what your question is, and I will try to get it to the panel. But just to kick us off then, what do you, the three of you, think has been the main digital transformation that's been accelerated as a consequence of this pandemic? I know the home working stuff has all been accelerated. And of course, as you said, David, there's all that fear of change and there's the technology gaps that have to be plugged really quickly. But what is the actual digital transformation acceleration look like? Who would like to kick off?
I could start, actually. I think the one big takeaway we've learned, and interestingly, I suppose, in terms of some of the questions that are coming through, is that people have kept things really simple. You know, there's very little point in boiling the ocean if all of a sudden we have to move, you know, our 1,000+ agents into a home working environment, in an environment where they don't necessarily even have the tech to be able to service that and then replicate everything that we've always done in a sort of contact center model. I mean, we've had examples of web chat for the NHS contact tracing we've built done in less than 22 hours because there was a need. We've had a huge UK organization move 500-600 people in a home working environment with merely a laptop and a Chrome browser within less than a week. But the way they've done that rather is to keep it simple. Start with the channels of necessity, start with the things that we need to keep the lights on and service those vulnerable customers and the customers we need to service, and then iterate thereafter. And again, that's sort of the process we've been taking, is what do we need day one? Let's then iterate, into the future once we've done that. But certainly, it's been around speed and simple transactions, simple IVR, simple self-service, and then getting people what they need immediately.
And it's interesting that you should say that, because there's a question here from Paul Twine to all panelists saying, does the panel feel that this crisis will see clients seeking essential elements only products to meet their needs rather than the full suite? So I think that plays more or less into what you were saying. If anyone would like to pick that up. George.
Yeah, I think I would agree with what David said. I think we've all seen situations where instead of implementing something in months, things have been implemented in hours. Going to Paul's question about essential elements rather than the full suite. So we're dealing with the new normal. We're dealing with the next normal. And essential elements is going to get us so far. But actually, I think it's more about buying a package solution rather than knitting together best of breeds. I think what has been exposed is the technical debt and complex architectures, where to actually achieve any change, you have to go through quite a complex choreography. Whereas organizations that actually have single solutions have found that much easier to actually accomplish change, because achieving channel shift, for example, you don't have to roll down one product and roll up another. It's actually more a question of configuration across different parts of the same solution. I think the acceleration in digital transformation is away from voice towards web chat. I think it's towards greater self-service, and ultimately to achieve business resilience, it's towards a greater automation, because the big variable that's been exposed through this pandemic has been people. The unavailability of people not being in the right place, not having the right connectivity. That, for a business resilience point of view, is going, I think, to accelerate necessary automation to actually augment what people do rather than fully replace them, of course.
I get that. Does that mean that we're looking at greater exclusion to a certain extent? I just throw that out there. It's not necessarily a question for now, but it certainly is something that always worries me. John, what's your take? I think John's on mute. Sorry, John.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. Very basic error there. So obviously I've got to learn this technology better as well. I think, so coming back on a couple of the points, I agree with your point about exclusion and vulnerability and treating customers fairly are obviously very crucial topics. And I think we'll need all channels to be able to be available for customers according to their needs and their ability to self-serve, or whether they need additional support. But I can see that changing the role of the contact centre operative to being more of an expert whose expertise and empathy in being able to help through their channels. And I also, George's point about the technology, something that we've seen within Atos that's been a real differentiator for organizations have been those who are sitting on old infrastructure and had a real challenge with old infrastructure and being able to make agile, quick decisions compared to those that are on modern infrastructure, but also particularly whether people are on the public cloud or on their own cloud within their infrastructure, which then has limitations. And those I think things like the public cloud will grow up, will move up the agenda of CTOs within organizations, because they'll look at it not only as a necessity for things like business continuity in the way that we work, but it's also they'll look at how they have impacted service to customers and in comparison to their competitors by not having the same infrastructure in place.
Lots of questions coming in now. So can I just throw one to you? Andriana, I think it is, Carrigan says, do you have any customer feedback to indicate if customers are converted, for want of a better word, to these new ways of working, or have a temporary understanding of our situation and would and could convert back in the future? Who wants to pick that one up?
Well, I think it takes 30 days to make a habit. And so I think customers will have got into the habit of a different way of doing things. Yes, there's the yearning for the fact that people want to actually be able to do some things the way they used to do things. But I think where it's frictionless and where it's easy for people, people will stay with that solution. Personally, I think it's bad news for the high street. The fact that Amazon is so frictionless, and more people will have moved across to that provider. You know, talking to colleagues in financial services at high street branch networks of banks and building societies, their footfall has just was falling anyway, but now it's virtually non-existent. So how that changes afterwards will be interesting.
That's an interesting point, and I think you know, a lot of this was changing anyway. This has just made it change much more quickly and at pace, and probably there were changes that we were hoping to put in place. Question from Declan Reid, who says, what do the panel think is the best solution to recruiting and training new staff in the current home working environment without that hands-on support that they normally receive being in the office? Having worked on a board where we've just appointed a new CEO in the middle of all of this and put that CEO plonk into the middle of her own dining room to run an organization, I think this is quite a big concern. Anybody got any light to throw on that? George?
Yeah, it's very interesting. In the old days, you walked into a contact center and you would judge the organization by the number of post-it notes around the screens. You know, and they're not just paper post-it notes, but people post-it notes. You know, a colleague that you could turn to, and those solutions are less accessible now. And in terms of training people up, I think actually it's going to lead to contact center professionals being better tooled up and in a better environment. So actually, I think that's going to improve the situation for people, because you can't rely on the person next door to you necessarily. Yes, there are chatting and conferencing facilities, but you know, to be honest, you've got somebody on the line. They want an answer. You can't look around your screen. You actually need digital post-it notes. You need digital person next to you to support you in that. And I think that's where the drive will come to actually.
But does that mean
improve
does that mean we need better support services?
Yes.
In the, you know, support for our teams in the background?
Yes, very much so. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
both
Okay.
physical and digital.
Yes. Stephen Hegarty says, will the recent events impact or reduce the cultural barriers customers may have to using AI technology for customer support and service? David? David, you're on mute. There you go.
There we go. Do you know what? I think that is obviously the most used term ever at the moment, isn't it? You're on mute. I think, yes, absolutely. I think recognizing...
Oops, we've got feedback.
Recognizing that AI has a place, self-service has a place. Recognizing, I guess, in a world, and particularly I've done a lot of work with a lot of our travel customers this past few weeks and months. Clearly had, you know, 90% of their staff furloughed, but still had customers wanting to know, can I get a refund? How is my holiday still on? How do I move my holiday till next year? We've been using a lot of AI and self-service to offer automation of refunds, automation of rebooking of holiday, automation, and even using AI. And one really innovative example was actually one of our customers posting online the real-time SLAs against all their channels in order for people to make a conscious choice about the channel they want to use based on the current wait time for that channel. So all of a sudden, we're in a world now where we've got a lot of AI running in the background, able to sort of self-service. The other thing I would add to that is we've also seen that video works. I mean, we're all sat here in our own homes or wherever we currently are in the world. Video is something that we've seen more deployment of, I guess, in the past 3 months than probably the past 12, 18 months, from, you know, ZocDoc in the US to NHS services where they're providing 111 and video services that originally were a 2-year rollout that then got contracted down to 2 weeks. But people have become accustomed to it. You know, we're socializing with our friends on video, and now all of a sudden we're all, you know, able to see each other's front rooms and various living environments. So there's a couple of real shifts, I think, that, again, this is accelerated.
And there are a lot of questions on that point, you know, that whole acceleration and how we keep up with it. But I think people want to know what are the next steps, and we're running out of time, sadly. But a lot of these initiatives that we've been set up and that we have you know, put in place really, really quickly, what are the next steps and what do we need to do to get to that next normal? David, George. No, go on, George.
Go on, George, you go.
Very interesting. I think the most necessary next step is actually not a technology one. For me, actually, it's about carrying on this can-do attitude, this embracing of proper agility rather than old waterfall habits just being rebranded with, you know, calling meetings scrums, but not actually changing processes. As a software vendor, we're very keen to see people use the software as it comes out of the box as a starting point. And that matches very well with agility and this can-do approach to actually you know, making necessary change. So that's what I would, you know, that's what I think will be the most valuable thing from this situation going forward, is a readier approach, a can-do approach to change.
Okay, David,
that,
quickly.
That would be very exciting.
A quick one from David.
I would agree. I think the other part, and again, there's lots of questions I think around training and, you know, how do we get visibility of individuals that are all in a home working environment? Our ethos has always been, you know, looking specifically prescriptively at the desktop environment and ensuring that an individual is armed with everything they could possibly need in order to be able to fulfill a customer inquiry. And more so now than ever, it's ensuring, back to George's point, that at a desktop level, be that for training, be that for coaching, be that for anything else, that desktop environment is suited to include next best action, to include all the other technology elements that an individual might need from a knowledge standpoint. That will make the training easier.
Interesting you say that. On the training point, do we have any suggestions and solutions for virtual side by side phone support to help new contact center staff take their first calls? That's quite specific. So if you have any ideas, please let us know and we'll pass them on. John, a quick next step from you.
I think for me, it's, and I was actually talking with one of our clients this morning, and it's about how we continue and embrace what we've seen through crisis management in terms of collaboration of people working together and the speed of decision making, which kind of goes across the other points that were made about the agile decision making. I think that that has freed some of the shackles that people exist within through corporate governance. And whilst corporate governance is important, I think that speed of decision making is also vital, and it's something that we can make sure that we embrace and take forward.
This has been speed industry debate. John Ainsworth, David Cousins, and George Roby. Thank you all very much indeed. We have a couple of poll questions for you that Pauline, I think you're going to put on the screen, and then we'll hear from. Now, I hope everybody can see that. Has your digital planning and strategy changed as a result of the pandemic? Yes, significantly. Yes, but not that much. No, we're still on track as before. So if you could click your boxes, I'm not quite sure how one does that. Pauline, if you have any insight, I think you just literally click on the box on the screen and submit, and we will get those answers. And then the second question is, as a consequence of the pandemic and changes to digital services, do you think the rest of the business values the customer operation? Do you think the rest of the business values the customer operation more than ever before, about the same, or less than before? So that would be terrific if you could let us have your answers to that. And I'll let Pauline decide when to take those questions off the screen. Yeah, click the screen and press submit. That's quite straightforward. Thank you very much indeed. So if everyone has managed to do that, that will give us some useful insight. And thank you very much indeed for your help on that. Thanks to the panel. Sorry you can't hear, but we'll do a virtual round of applause. Thank you very much, panel. Now, Paul Lambert is head of customer operations at Camelot, and he has been having a conversation with Anne-Marie Forsyth, who obviously is the chief executive at CCA. Paul and his team won the CX Brand of the Year at the CCA Gala Dinner in November 2019. Remember dinners? We used to have those. Hopefully we will again. And after that, they decided to apply for CCA Global Standard Accreditation and received the great news of their accreditation just last week.
Welcome to this session, everyone. I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Lambert, who's Head of Operations at Camelot. Paul, welcome. Tell us just a little bit about how things have been at Camelot over the last few months.
Yeah, hi Marie. Thank you for inviting me along for a chat this afternoon. It's great to have the opportunity. Yeah, it's been challenging, hasn't it? I think for all businesses, and Camelot, of course, are no different. Actually, as we moved into lockdown, we were just coming to the end of our financial year, and actually it had been a record year for us. So we had just achieved £7.9 billion worth of sales, and very importantly, sort of 1.8 billion of good causes. But with lockdown starting, of course, we weren't going out to the high street, were we? Retailers were closed. Those that were open were either offering, partial service in some cases to manage the well-being of their colleagues, and that obviously has impacted us over the last few months. But it's pretty resilient business actually, Camelot and the National Lottery. And what we have seen is quite a big shift to our online channels. And at the height of lockdown, it was really interesting. Predominantly our business is 70% of our total sales, Anne-Marie, come from retail. And at the height of lockdown, what we saw was our digital sales accounting for nearly 47% of our total sales. So, a shift, from 30% up to that. So we clearly saw a lot of our players going online. And for us in customer operations, that's created a lot more customer contact throughout our channels, actually, with players needing more help, more support at this time, and wanting to take more time talking to the team, actually. I'm pleased to say over recent weeks, and particularly this week, as we know, we're seeing more retail stores opening. And it'd be quite interesting to see what happens, because whether those players stay online or whether they go back to retail or do a bit of both, it'll be interesting to see what happens. And of course, we'll be customer led by that. And I think our job is to make it easy for players, irrespective of where they play. So yeah, a challenging time for us.
Yeah. What do you think's most surprised you, Paul, just about this? I mean, you mentioned there about the high digital uptake. What else has surprised you about the impact of COVID?
That's a really good question, actually. I think there's I guess a few things really. I guess if if I think about it from, you know, a customer point of view, the groups that have been the fastest growing online have tended to be, you know, older customers, times who have needed more support, and that's certainly over indexed versus other groups. So we've invested quite a lot in helping them navigate our online platforms, giving them more support through the centre. You know, and so I think that's one of the things. I think the other thing, and it's a good surprise actually, if I think if you had asked me back in January and said, you know, Paul, you know, the job to do is move everyone to home working within a few weeks, I would have probably said that's very interesting, but we may need to talk about the timelines. So in a good way, I've been really surprised, you know, how well people have worked together, and the fact that we've actually been able to achieve that in a couple of weeks. And when everyone's been focused on one goal, whether it's stakeholders, support from our regulator, our ability to move that quickly. And when I think about, you know, the sessions actually that CCA have been running every week and talking to colleagues around the industry, yeah, I think I've been really impressed with, you know, our sort of collective ability to adapt and be flexible to continue delivering, you know, the service to customers in such a challenging environment. So I think for me, it's the pace at which we've been able to do things.
Yeah, no, I think that's common to lots of organisations that we've been speaking to, and as you say, throughout the network, it's probably the biggest surprise for organisations, and also I think the biggest delight. It's been a real pleasure, I think, for organisations to have the obstacles moved out of the road. So before the pandemic, you'd agreed to come to present your operation to be accredited and to be assessed against the CCA Global Standard, and you decided to go ahead with it regardless of the pandemic. So what's your opinion now that you're through? What did it teach you, and what were the challenges?
Yeah, we spent quite a lot of time actually talking about the accreditation at this time, and whether, to be honest, whether we should go ahead and do it, or whether we should you know, pause and delay it. And I think, you know, our sort of thought process there was, over the last few years, we've invested a lot of time building and improving our you know, our service proposition, our service model, and lots of people around the organisation have put a lot of hard work into that. And so I think, first of all, we wanted to test that and understand how we compared to, you know, other peers across the industry, and understand what was working well, and what could we learn from it. So I think that was the first thing, that we were really keen to do it. I think we also felt, and it has transpired, that by doing it now, it would give us the opportunity, while we went through the assessment, of stepping back and looking at, if you like, the end-to-end of everything that we do, whether that's the channels we use, the process and procedures we use, the training and development, and look at it holistically, and not only ask ourselves, you know, through the assessment, are we in a good place, but also to use it as an opportunity to say, well, in our current context, based on that's how we work, does it help us understand where we need to maybe change or adapt things? A good example of that would be, you know, our approach to training and development. And in the last few months, that's changed significantly. So whilst the fundamentals stay in place of how we think about training and development, the way we deliver it has changed completely. So everything's moved online. We have online modules now, and so that, you know, our virtual training is 100%. You know, whereas before it probably accounted for, you know, maybe 30 or 40% of what we did. So it gave us a really good opportunity to not only get through the assessment, but think about how we could use it to test what we were doing today and what might need to change tomorrow. The other thing that I would add, which I didn't expect actually going in, was, you know, apart from the fact that you learn a lot of what, you know, in terms of best practice from other businesses that have been through CCA's accreditation and have been doing it for years, because of course this is our first time. And so you learn from some of the good things that other people have done through the process, and some of those we'll reflect on in the coming days and weeks around how we can learn from those. But a time when we were almost exclusively focused on our operation within COVID, it gave us and our stakeholders actually something very aspirational to focus on that was different from managing the sort of day-to-day COVID situation. So that actually worked really well for us. So yeah, we found it a really good experience. The virtual element of it, in a way, helped us, because whereas we didn't have the assessors coming on site and giving us the opportunity maybe to bring that to life, it meant that we had to think really carefully about the evidence that we were submitting, how we were doing that, and how we used a sort of virtual way of communicating that and bringing it to life. And in many ways, that helped us think very clearly about what do we do and does it meet the standard required. So overall, I think we've had to invest a lot of time into it, as it was our first attempt, but it's been a really good experience for us.
That's great to hear. And of course, that's reflected in your success of the accreditation. And you've received some absolutely fantastic feedback from the assessment team, who are not the easiest to please. They see lots of examples of success and whatever else. So the fact that you've got this on the review board as well. I mean, did the team, was there anything in that feedback that surprised you? Anything that you thought, I didn't realise we were quite so good at that? Because that quite often is the outcome for organisations.
Yeah, do you know, that's a really good question, actually. And I think, what would I say? There's probably a few things that come to mind, actually. We talk a lot internally in Camelot about our sort of cross-functional working and how can we always improve that. And one of the things that came out of the assessment, actually, was we do that very well. The way in which our operation works with our digital teams, our marketing teams, particularly our learning and development teams that sit in our people department. And it really shone quite a good light on the fact that there are many great examples of where we do that well. I think the other thing was, as part of the engagement survey that the accreditation does, that I found that really helpful, because not so much from a scores perspective, although they were very good and that was great to see. We do a lot of engagement surveys, as I know many businesses within the CCA group do, whether that's our full engagement survey or pulse checks, as we call them, through the year. But what I particularly liked was the way in which the sentiment was played back, because of course, within, I guess, any submission and our evidence, we can submit, this is what we do. But hearing some of the sentiment played back through the assessors was really helpful, because that's what our teams say. That's what our teams say. This is what it's actually like. And we found that really, really, I guess, quite inspiring. Some of the words that played back to us were around, it's a supportive, it's a fun environment, there's a real focus on teamwork, there's a real focus on training and development. And hearing that come back from, I guess, industry peers and experts in the words of our colleagues, it is really valuable, actually. And that was great to hear.
Okay, Paul, talking of building on success, last year at CCA's convention in November 2019, which seems like an awfully long time ago, you guys won the CX Brand of the Year, which was a great accolade. And then within the year, you've become accredited to the global standards. So what's next for you and the team, Paul?
Well, thank you. And you're right. Doesn't it feel a long time ago now? But I would first of all say, of course, we were really proud to have won that award, and delighted that we've passed accreditation. So the first thing is we want to build on that by making sure we stay involved in accreditation and hopefully continue to pass that for years to come. More broadly than that, as a business, we've been looking at our business plan to really understand, when we review that, what continues to be the right things to do in our plan, what needs to change because of COVID-19. I think one of the important conversations for us, and particularly as a service team, is thinking about what does our future service model look like in the sort of mid-term and longer term. Of course, we'll be very much guided by government guidelines, but we're having quite a interesting conversation about what is the right thing to do for our customers, our retailers, and our colleagues. And I know that's a conversation that many organisations are having and having with CCA. I think the other things that really spring to mind are we're very much looking at how we continue to look at and invest in digital capability for customer service, thinking about where the right places are to place that to make it easier for our customers. But also, one of the things that we've really noticed and learned through the last 3 months is how much our players and retailers, for that matter, really value personal contact. And so we're going to continue to invest in our training and development around the customer experience and how we manage those contacts and those conversations. I think particularly for us, there'll be a big focus in the coming weeks and months on our vulnerable players. We've invested a lot in that in the last few months because we're very aware at this time it's even more important, I think. So that'll continue to be the case for us. So a lot going on, and I expect that the pace as ever in customer service and operations will continue to stay very high.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Paul. I really enjoyed chatting today. I'm sure everybody who's listening's got a lot out of that, and it's inspired us to keep winning. Not only just to buy those tickets, if you're not in it, you can't win it, all that sort of stuff. But it was certainly a winning formula with Camelot. So delighted to have had the opportunity to chat today, and thank you so much, and good luck.
Yeah, thank you for your time, Anne-Marie.
Thank you.
And thank you to both Paul and Anne-Marie. That was a really inspiring session. I'm sure you will agree. Now, I know that Paul might be in the audience. That would have been great to have time for a couple of questions, but unfortunately, we've got to move on to our final presentation, which fortunately is a great presentation from Shelley Kerr, MBE, who is the manager of Scotland's women's football team. She presented at the CCA annual convention 2 years ago. Many of you will have heard her before. She was explaining the importance of teamwork and her approach to forming a world-class team. Today, she'll share how much of the principles that apply to sport can also be applied to business, such as management philosophy, challenges, motivation, and creating a recipe for success.
Hi everyone, my name's Shelley Kerr and I'm the Scottish Women's National Team Head Coach, and I'm delighted to actually be involved again. I think 2 years ago I spoke at the CCE Global Annual Conference, and I'm delighted to be asked back. You can see I'm not actually in Hampden, but the visual there, I like to touch base with obviously our national stadium. What I'm going to talk to you about is about managing the team. And I think that there are many similarities in management and sport and there is in business, and there's a real correlation. I'll touch base in the presentation about my performance journey because it's very relevant in terms of the management techniques that I use. I'll speak a little bit about motivating, what motivates me and how do I motivate others. I'll speak a little bit about my management philosophy. And the competitive environment, because it's hugely important, not just in sport but in business as well. The reflect and evaluation part, I think critique is really important so that you can evolve as a business, and obviously my business is sport. So it's critical that, you know, we do reflect and evaluate to try and look at the challenges that we face in the future. And I'm going to give you my recipe for success, and hopefully we can open up for some questions. So my performance journey, I mean, you can see in the left-hand column, it's 40 plus, and that's age increments. And I did say that when I hit 50, that I wouldn't add 50 on it. So I've just got 40 plus. So method behind the madness. But there's years increments here, and I call this my performance journey. And you can see on the right-hand side, I think anything in life, you're going to face challenges. There's always going to face challenges. And I think that's important, that you don't have a smooth pathway, because those challenges can help develop your characteristics. So the early years for me, and I will try and skim through this, but I think it just gives you a little bit of context in terms of my whole performance journey. And I guess what I want to say there is that even although if you look at the top in the professional category, I'm now the national team coach, I haven't always been a national team coach, and I've had to work extremely hard in many different businesses and clubs and communities, etc., to get where I've got to today. So the early years for me was about growing up in my local community. Early on, I had a passion for football, and that's extremely important as well, because you do something for the love of it. And I developed that passion, played in an era where it wasn't deemed appropriate for girls to play football. So, you know, there's a pattern going to develop here, and that is that if you look at that 0 to 5 years, the intro years into my childhood and particular sport, there was barriers and hurdles in the way. So I had to climb those hurdles and face those barriers. And I guess the first thing that, you know, key quality here for me as a manager is resilience. I moved on to my primary school, and I was the first girl to play in my primary school. It was all boys. And again, you know, there was a stigma. Every time they seen a girl playing, you had that tomboy reputation and so on and so on. So, but it's almost, you know, another characteristic developing. I was determined to prove a point that I was as good as the boys. Then I moved on to my secondary school, West Calder High, and, you know, that's where things became really tough for me as a teenager. So we have a lot of dropout in sport, especially for girls at that age. But back then, there wasn't the pathway that we have now in girls and women's football. So I wasn't allowed to play with the boys at the age of 13, and I had to play women's football. So I spent maybe 2 years on the bench, being a substitute, because I had to play women's football. So I was playing against players twice my age. And you may think, what's that got to do with management? And the point that I want to make here is that going through different things in life, both personally and professionally, help define you. They really do develop your characteristics and your personality, which I think is key. I moved on. I left school with no qualifications. Grew up in the 80s, and where unemployment was quite significant, and you were doing well if you got a full-time job. None of my family went on to study academically at that point. We all had jobs, and youngest of 4, I got a full-time job for an electronics company called Mitsubishi. And I want to really focus on that side, because I entered that job as a production operator, made VCRs, and you guys are probably too young to remember VCRs, but so I was there for 17 years, started off as a production operator, and I built my education up in the factory, developed, and eventually I became a supervisor. And when I finished, I was a section leader, so I was responsible for about 90 employees. So it was, I went through a process, and again, you know, further developed myself. And those 17 years, obviously Mitsubishi Electric are a Japanese company, and they taught me so many values, so many skills that I use now when I coach football and when I manage in football and sport. we had to be efficient and effective. We had to get outputs every day because it affected productivity. So it was a results-driven business, but just in a different way. And I have to be honest, culturally, the Japanese people, I learned so much of discipline. I then moved on after being there for 17 years, and I moved on to North Lanarkshire Council, and I got a job as a football development officer. And I have to mention that throughout this time, I was working full time, and I was also playing football for my national team as well. I moved on to Scottish FA, got a job as a development officer. It was a national remit. And at this point, it was a tough time for me also. So again, you can see that right hand, little signpost there, challenges ahead. I dropped out of the sport for a few years. I had my daughter who's now 24. So again, it was a tough time, but it was a decision that I made that I needed to focus on my family. Went back to football, and in the background, I was developing further skills to become a coach. So I think I done my first coaching license in 1989, and I progressed through all the different pathways. So I didn't just do adult, I wanted to do the children's pathway first, then the youth, and then the adult. And again, my focus has always been, and I'll rewind a little bit. People think the job that I do now, I've planned to get where I've got to. It hasn't been by default, it has been by design, but I didn't say I want to be the national team coach. What I did try and do was develop a skill set that would complement my practical experience as a former athlete, footballer, and then subsequently a coach. And I think, one of the biggest achievements, we obviously, everyone knows that, we're first time ever we qualified for the World Cup in 2019. But one of my biggest achievements, I have to say, was graduating in 2016 with a Masters in Sports Management, because I left school with no qualifications. So to go back and study at that level was such a hard thing for me to do. And also within that period, I was the first woman to take a men's team in Stirling University. So first woman in the UK to do that. And so maybe off on a tangent here going through my performance journey, but there's really a lot of relevance by sharing this message. And I guess, it pretty much comes down to, my motivation to be a coach and to be a manager. And, if you think about coach, you teach. Management for me is slightly different, and I'll touch base on that just shortly. But my motivation has always been, as a player, I was the captain in most teams that I played in, and I had real leadership qualities. So I've always been about helping people. And I have the desire and confidence that I can make a difference in people. I think being in charge, taking on responsibility is one of the things that makes me thrive. Having to make difficult decisions at challenging times. So that does drive me to become a manager and to be a manager. I think you are responsible, and when things go well, there's so much joy and satisfaction because you're the one that's at the helm. And I think, it's doing things as a collective, working collaboratively to achieve success really as a key factor on why I'm motivated to be a manager, and embracing the challenge as well. I think if you go back to the previous slide about, the early years, there's always been challenges and barriers in my way. So I want to embrace that. When someone says, Shelley, you can't do that, or that'll be too tough, then I want to make sure that I can problem solve and come up with a solution. Do I do it all the time? Perhaps not, but I do try. And I think as well, I think it's important we talk about being leaders but I think it's important that you give others the opportunity. And so a key part of what we do within the national team as well with our players is to try and develop other leaders. You can't solely do things on your own, so it's important that you develop other leaders. So that's a little bit, you know, my motivation for being a manager. In terms of my philosophy, and this is again aligns to the performance journey. So, you know, what sets you apart in terms of management? You get 100 managers, thousands of managers, maybe with the same experiences, the same skill sets. And what sets you apart is your own experiences, because that defines your character and it develops your personality. But touching base on what I said earlier, I think there is a lot of transferable skills and transferable situations that correlate to business management and football management. And if I was to take the word football out, you know, just looking at my management philosophy, it would be similar to other managers. You know, it's shaped by your own experiences as an individual, as a teacher, as an employee, and it's providing a holistic approach. And these key words are so important for me, incorporating structure. You need structure in any business and any walk of life, discipline, organisation, and a balance between, those two words really epitomise what you would do in sport, but if you take out those two words and they're not related to football, you would talk about, so developing and winning for me would be process and outcome. And I know when I speak to my team, whether it's a team of staff or whether it's the team themselves, the players, we focus on the process rather than the outcome. Of course, we want the outcome, we want to win, but we're very much process driven. And when, you know, I can elaborate more on my management philosophy, and I categorize it over 3 different pillars. So one pillar would be leadership, one would be management, and one is about, you know, we talk about being the boss, or in football they say gaffer. And they're all different, you know, and I won't go through all the skill sets, but leadership for me is about your decision making and, you know, your personality. How do you inspire? And I think that you have to be a role model as well. In management, you're more about identifying the right people, the workforce, how you delegate. Planning is huge, how you organise and how you direct. And again, having this philosophy and being the boss. If I relate this to football, that's when in the moment you're the one that's responsible for the decision making. So you have to, at times, make sure that people know that you're the boss. A lot of the time in business and management and sport and management, we talk about autonomy. And of course, you want to develop people, people skills, but at times you have to be the boss. And again, I think honesty and being firm and fair is so important. I don't want to touch base too much on this because this is more about coaching football, but I guess the point I wanted to make on this slide is that it's the what. What is it you're trying to achieve? So you have a philosophy, and people think that maybe football coaches and football management, they don't think strategically. That's something that I've learned in my time coming from a practical background, and how important it is to learn the theoretical side of business and sport. So even when we coach, we have a framework. So we have what we want is the end product. We want to play an entertaining game. If it's in business, you want to have a good product that's viable, that can sell, and so on and so on. So it's the what, and how do you do that? And we always talk about frameworks. So I don't want to talk too much about football because this presentation is more about managing people. So, but it just lets you understand that everything we do, we always focus on having the right process, looking at outcomes, and how do you get to that point. And really, we always work within frameworks. I guess here as well, it's you know, and I maybe touch base on you know, the individual characteristics later on, but how do you judge where you're at in terms of management And certainly in football, and I think it's the same in business, you benchmark, you look at the competitive environment. For us in football, it's looking about who we're going to be playing, who are the opponents, who with similar budgets, with similar amount of registered players. But the key questions that we would ask is, how good are we at what we do, and are we as good as others? And that's hugely important in sport. And then how can we get better at what we do? It's not just enough we qualified for the final tournament in the Euros in the Netherlands in 2017. Subsequently went on to qualify for first ever World Cup, but actually we didn't get out the group. So what can we do better, and what do we need to change to get to the next level? So it's a constant adjustment of trying to reflect, evaluate, to see how you can bridge the gap to become better. And even although we've been successful, sometimes you plateau. So when you're successful, it's even more important to evaluate and critique and how you can take the next step. So it's all about benchmarking, adjusting, changing, modifying, transition. And really right now, for so many businesses and sport as well, under the current unique circumstances and challenges we face, this is so important to look at how we adjust and how we change in terms of the circumstances that we find ourselves in. How do we motivate our workforce? We've got so many challenges ahead in business and in sport, and how we captivate the key people that are integral to our businesses operating. I spoke a little bit about the competitive environment and how we reflect and evaluate, and we look at key things. I mentioned processes. Are the processes right that we have in place? We look at global trends and the competitive environment, but what is our performance tracking tool and results? What about the workforce? How do we recruit? And you recruit in business for staff, we recruit in football. It's the same. You should have a human resource management process that you make sure that you get the best staff, and you can put training in place, you keep them motivated, you engage with them. And when you have a game plan, you will have a strategy in your business that you want to get that outcome and the end product. And it's no different in football management. And the logistics that come with that. And two key things for us is, we look at outcomes, but what are our learning objectives? And even for the players and how we operate the system we play in football, we will set the player's objective. And it's not always about 3 points, because if you always focus on that outcome, then you forget how people develop and the workforce develop. What are the challenges in management? And I'm going to keep this specific in my job, because I think it's good to share. And the challenges will be similar, but maybe a little bit different. But the nature of the job in football management, there's one guarantee probably, and that is that at some point you're going to lose your job. The pressures, because you have the expectations of, in my situation, it's the expectations of a country. You have the job insecurity that goes hand in hand with the nature of the job. You have public scrutiny, and that's the same way any big businesses. If you work for Sky or BT and you're the CEO or you're the manager of a department, you will get public scrutiny if things don't go well in your business. How do you cope with it? These are all the challenges that you'd face. And I mention again the process versus outcome. In football, there is a lot of short-termism, and I can never understand that. And I can't in some ways, because ultimately you know that if you don't look at getting results in the short term, you're going to lose your job. However, so far in my career, I've always been process driven, and I'll always argue the case. And that might hinder my development as a manager, and it might hinder my opportunities, but it's the way that I think that people should manage, is look at short-term, medium and long-term strategies. And you constantly need to adjust the business model or the sporting model that you operate within. And this is a key one for managers and people. How do you lead yourself? I use this analogy about when you go on a plane, which is going to be less frequent right now under the current circumstance. But when you're on an aircraft and you're getting your flight, they always talk about putting your own oxygen mask on first when they go through this safety procedures. And it's very true. You need to look after yourself. Sleep, rest, stretching the imagination, challenging your brain, reading, switching off when it's time to switch off. There's so many people now get consumed by their working environment and their working life. And it's something that I've been really poor at, and it's something that I need to develop as leading myself. And again, managing your workload, time management. These are all the common challenges that we face as managers, as well as trying to, so firstly, you need to lead yourself, but also lead your people. And when it comes to managing people, I will always say that you have processes in place and how to manage and how you think. Sometimes it's a gut feeling, because you have to treat everyone as unique in this life. Everyone in this world is unique as a person. Different things make them tick, different things motivate them. Some people are motivated by money, some people are motivated by their aspirations and their development, career opportunities. So you have to understand people. And that is hard because you're responsible for outcomes, but you have to get to know the individual and how to get the best out of a team. And that's not an easy job, but I always look at treating everyone as being unique in this world, and everyone that I work with. And do I get it right all the time when we deal with people? No, but I try. And I'll make this point. I always think as managers, if you can give a rationale for everything that you do, then that will stand you in good stead. People might not agree with you, but I think being able to give a rationale is so important. And I've mentioned short-term and long-term politics and business, politics and sport. And a key thing for me, and being a woman involved in a predominantly male environment, the politics pick the battles in a strategic way, and the ones that you can win and get the most back from. I think that's important. Doesn't make me want to fight more and more battles, but you need to manage your energy. And that is so important as well. Manage your energy so that you can manage your team. Relationships are huge. We will break relationships at times because we have to be the boss at times, but how do you create a really, really good culture and a good environment in your team? And that comes down to values and setting values. One of the things that certainly we've done in the national team is I don't set the values. They're not my values. I have values as an individual. But if you operate within a team, it's good to sometimes get the team to actually input on what the value should be. Then they're breaking their own parameters or going out with their own parameters. And it's something that we've worked extensively on within the national team. And keeping a distance, sometimes, you know, when you make the big decisions, it's hard if you're too close. So keeping a distance and also perspective. There's reality and there's perspective. And again, managing expectations. How do you manage individuals' expectations? How do you, so internal and then external, how do you manage those expectations? And I want to say, you know, when I went to the World Cup with the team last year, it was huge because I felt the pressure tenfold from what I've ever done. And I'm not ashamed to admit that. But the biggest challenge was managing everyone's expectations. Before we went, we beat Brazil. When did Scotland ever beat Brazil? So people thought we were actually going to win the World Cup. So the scrutiny that you're under at times in management positions is really, really tough. But I felt as if I had the whole country, the whole nation, the weight of the nation on my shoulders as the coach, because when things go well, it's the workforce that contributed to that, it's the players. When things don't go well, it's the manager or the coach's fault. And, you know, finally, I'm going to try and this was presented to me on my pro license a while ago when we had a strategic person come in and speak to us about how to correlate strategy into football. And on the left-hand column, and I won't go through them all, but challenge the way we do things, create a shared vision for the future. This was all strategic from a guest speaker that came in to speak to all the football coaches on the pro license. And what I tried to do from there was actually, how do I take that and then put it into a football context? So I did, and this is certainly what I've looked at as being a recipe for success in terms of managing players and managing, we call a team behind the team. So stimulate and challenge the players, and that's being creative with the content that you devise at training, also trying to educate them in a creative way through performance analysis, having a philosophy and a framework. It's easier to learn if there's clarity, and from a footballing context, we talk about just 3 moments in the game, so it keeps it nice and simple, but the players know that there's a framework for everything that we do. And I think that's important, that when you're in a leadership position, that your workforce, they trust you as a manager to have a little bit guidance and to lead in the right way. Selling your vision, and again, I go back to the performance journey. You use your experience and you use your expertise and all the different areas that you've worked in previously, and your experiences that you have in life. And how do you sell your vision? And that's by getting buy-in from your team of people that you work with. Have a game plan. If I can think back to the World Cup campaign, right at the very start, here's the target. We want to go to the World Cup, and this is how we're going to do it. And communicate that plan. I think key thing is manager. People think because you're the manager, you have no weaknesses. You do. So you have to know your own strengths and know your own weaknesses, and know the competitive environment as well, their strengths and weaknesses. Selection of your team of people. Make sure you get the right people. You're only as good as the people that you recruit. Have a hunger, a desire, and intelligence to make things happen. And again, I mentioned evaluate and analyse what you do. Have open communication. I operate an open door policy. Come and speak to me. Broad shoulders. Make sure that you're approachable and you enjoy, reflect, and get ready to go again. And that's so important when it comes to sport, I can assure you, because the sport is filled with so many emotions, and you've got to have emotional intelligence, but recognise that you ain't going to win all the time. Things ain't going to be perfect. So it's important that you have a resilience, and you know that if things don't go your way, the best way to respond, and that's through experience and it's through communication. And I'm going to finish off just by, this is a quote. I'm sure that some might support football in the audience, some might not, but this is Sir Alex Ferguson, who is obviously the best Scottish manager we've ever had. And I'm putting his name out there because I'm quite proud that he contacted me when we were going through our World Cup campaign. And he sent me a message before the game, and it stuck with me, and I'll use it all the time. And he said, reflection based on when moments don't go your way, it makes you better and defines your character. It forces you to identify who you are. I thought it was a really, really good message. And it's so true. And I think in these challenging times, it's about recognising what's going on globally and how you can get the best out of people and how you can engage with your people. And that's so important. And, you know, I hope this presentation has been helpful. I've tried to speak about my management experiences. You will obviously be managing a team of people right now who are working remotely. They feel it's hard to be motivated, and as managers we go through the same. And my biggest piece of advice is manage your own energy first, and make sure you're engaging and communicating with your team, because you will need them. You know, nobody ever achieves anything on their own in life. And I'm going to finish by saying the two things that help me, and everything that I do is to be organised and disciplined. And I think if you have those two qualities, then you set yourself up in life to be successful. I hope you enjoy the conference, and it's been great chatting to you all. Thank you.
Big round of applause from everybody. And I see that you're on the line. We are out of time. We're well over, but can we just take the opportunity, as you're here, to ask you one quick question? Paul Twine says, as a manager and a leader who faced a challenging situation as you debriefed the team after the Women's World Cup, what advice would you give to managers and leaders facing tough debriefs as organizations reflect on their performance and resilience during the coronavirus pandemic?
Paul, that's a tough question. I think it's really difficult because you have to have a bit of empathy, obviously, with the circumstances, because everyone's situation, personal situation is different. And that's the key of understanding your own workforce and your own team. But I think a huge thing is clarity, giving the team clarity, your workforce clarity, within reasonable time frames. That's so important. People want to know, what's happening, and give a rationale. And I would say the two key things is that when you're a manager, people trust you. So it's important to be honest as much as you can in the circumstances and be upfront and within the right time frames. And I think that's key, and doing it in a way that, when you have to communicate to them, it's done in the most personalized way. I think that's important, to personalize things. And it's not an easy situation for everyone right now. So it's a very tough job that managers have.
And Shelley, any tips for keeping yourself motivated so that you can keep others motivated despite the obvious challenges and pressures?
I think trying to be positive. That's throughout this whole time. We've 3.5 months now, I think, trying to keep yourself positive, and because the people that if you're the leader of a team, they can sense when things are not right with you. So I think keeping a positive mindset. I've been trying to stay fit and healthy, go out a bit of running and walking the dog, clear your head, and still planning your day, because it can be really, really tedious when you're in a small box room trying to do the same job that you've done previously. But and see, in the early part, I watched the news every day, and I stopped doing it because it was so negative. So I tried to focus on other things. And as I say, I always think exercise helps, even if it's walking. It refreshes your mind so that you're focused on the job that you have to do.
Shelley, thank you very, very much indeed. If I could find the button that says clap, which is on other tools that we use, I certainly would lead a celebration. Thank you very, very much indeed for your presentation. Thank you for joining us. And I'm sure everybody else is at home doing the same thing. Thumbs up. And thank you to everybody who's taking part this morning. We'll be back tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, so please do join us then. In the meantime, we've been posting comments on LinkedIn as this session has gone ahead. So you can find us there. If you search for CCA Global, you'll find the posts. Post your own comments, share our comments, etc. And let's create a bit of a buzz about this. Thank you again to our sponsors for today, Oracle, Twilio and Vonage, and silver sponsors Polly. And please join tomorrow when we will start again at 10 o'clock. Have a quick look for the program. You'll see tomorrow's lineup, and we will see you tomorrow. Enjoy the day.